If you've ever wanted to make homemade oat milk, almond milk, or any sort of nut or seed milk at home and you've wondered which option is the best, well, I'm here to tell you today. In the lineup, we've got the Almond Cow, we've got the Nutr, and we've got a regular blender. And then I've got my little recipe here. We're gonna use the same proportions of all of the ingredients across each machine so that way it can be as consistent as possible. And basically, we will just be gauging based off of how quick it takes, the texture, and of course we'll factor in the cost. Now, before we actually get into making the milk, let's talk about a few pros and cons about each machine. Okay, first up we have the Almond Cow. I think the best perk to this one is how much it makes. It makes 5 to 6 cups of milk per serving, which is great if you have a big family, if you use a lot of milk, and things of that nature. Another perk to this one, it is very, very quick. Not that the other ones take significantly more amounts of time, but I think this one definitely is the quickest. It even made almond milk with very, very hard almonds in about 30 seconds. And there's no mess. The nuts or seeds stay contained in this basket, so therefore there's no filtering for you to do, which I think makes cleanup the easiest. It also makes storage of the pulp the easiest if you want to reuse that instead of wasting it. I think the biggest downside to this machine though is that it is single purpose. You can only use it to make milk, nothing else. I've only used this once, so to be honest, I don't have like the best feel for it, but I was very impressed when I did use it. Next up is the Nutr. I have had this for like 3 or 4 years. I got it when I lived in Vegas. We used it a lot when we lived in an RV, and we also lived an hour from a grocery store. This made it very, very convenient to make small batch milk at home. This really depends on how much milk you're using. Are you an individual person who only needs a cup of milk a day? Maybe this is for you. Do you live in a family and need a lot of milk? Maybe that's for you. It comes with a little strainer basket, so mess with this is also pretty minimal as well. And honestly, I think the biggest perk to this is a multi-purpose machine. You can make smoothies in here, you can make soup in here. They even have a hummus recipe on their website. There are so many different things that you can make in this machine, which I think makes it worth more for its money. This is also really cool. All of these different buttons down here, you can make different temperatures of milk. You can make room temperature milk, which takes about 5 minutes, or you can make hot milk, which takes about 20 minutes. So it does take a long time, but that means you could make a latte in here. I have not made anything fancy in there. We really only used it for making oat milk or other nut milk. Just because this is called an Almond Cow, you can put other nuts and seeds in here, and same with this, you can put any nut or seed in either of these machines and make any kind of nut or seed milk that you prefer. So I guess maybe a downside to this one is, yeah, if you do need a lot of milk, this would not be the machine for you. Downside would be it takes a longer time, and the cleanup, while not terribly messy because it does come with this little basket, it's not the most mess-free thing in the world either. And finally, the trusty blender. I know this is a pretty high-end blender. This is a Vitamix that we splurged on 2020-ish, probably. Our old blender sucked, it broke, and we said, let's splurge, we'll keep and use this forever, and we do. Again, a multi-purpose item. You can make hummus, smoothies, soups, sauces. You can make literally anything in a blender. So a blender is great because it is multi-purpose. But I think the biggest downside to the blender is it is the messiest. You have to either use a strainer, you have to use a nut milk bag, you have to use something to get out all those solids when you're making homemade nut milk. So I think that's the biggest downside to a blender. But also, yeah, for the record, this might be a more expensive blender, but I have made homemade oat milk before in cheaper blenders, and it works just the same. The quality of the blender does not really enhance or take away from the quality of the homemade milk that you're making. I think also a downside to blenders is that you have to actually monitor the oat milk yourself. With these machines, they're programmed, right? They know how long it takes to make a certain recipe. With a blender, you gotta be the one to do that. There's no technology telling you when your oat milk is done. So it can be very easy to make your oat milk too slimy, too gritty, not creamy enough. I think also a very obvious benefit to blenders too is that you probably already have one. So that way you don't have to actually buy a machine. Because yeah, you don't have to buy the Almond Cow, you don't have to buy the Nutr to make your own homemade nut milk, oat milk at home to reduce waste and save some money. If you already have a blender, you have some oats, very, very cost effective to start making your own oat milk at home. If you don't have the money to spend on one of these machines, you do not have to. Of course, we will get into the taste test and see if these are worth the money. Does it make a better quality oat milk than a blender? Let's find out. Okay, so here's how it's gonna work. I'm gonna make the oat milk recipe in each of these, and then I'm gonna taste it immediately because I think it does have a different taste if you use it right away versus store it in the fridge for a couple hours. I don't like any homemade milks because they are typically very gritty, they can be slimy, they separate, they're not the best flavor. I love a store-bought milk. What can I say? Especially because they're fortified. I'm gonna be extra harsh because I don't typically like any of these milks. Let's get into it. Key here with oat milk too is cold water. Keep your oat milk as cold as possible to prevent the sliminess. Oats are great too because you don't have to soak them. Some other milks like almond milk, soy milk, you have to soak them, which can be time consuming. I like how quick oat milk is. And then we're gonna flavor our milk to make it taste as close to store-bought as possible. half a teaspoon of vanilla. That's kind of a lot of vanilla. I'm actually gonna do a little bit less than that. Ooh. And then a pinch of salt. Because I'm picky, gonna judge them based off of sound. I don't like loud things, okay? I haven't used the Vitamix. I think I'm going to do about medium speed for about 30 seconds. And since not everybody has a nut milk bag, to include myself, I'm just gonna do this in a way that is probably accessible to most people, and that is a mesh strainer. If you have a nut milk bag, that will get you the best result because it will trap the most particles. But also if you squeeze the nut milk bag too much, it can make the oat milk slimy. So I think we're just gonna run it through the strainer twice to get as much out as possible and hope for the best. Smells oaty. I think the key here is to also just let gravity do its thing instead of like mixing it and pushing the sediment, for lack of a better word, through. And we're also going to catch as much of this oat pulp as possible and save it in a recipe. All right, taste test and visual test. I think it looks pretty good. I can maybe see like a little bit of stuff floating in there. Looks like oat milk to me. Cheers. Flavor-wise, good. Too watery. I would do less water next time. But the vanilla maple salt, that's a great addition. It takes away from the oatiness because like it's gonna be oaty. It's made out of oats. That's not nearly as gritty as I was expecting. So that's great news. I think the texture could probably be a little bit better. So I'm curious to see if the machines make it less slimy because it is ever so slightly slimy, like just a bit. I think I did the right amount of time. In fact, I probably could have done like 5 less seconds. Maybe added a couple ice cubes to help out. Quite impressed with the blender. And we'll see how long they take to separate. 9:05. And we'll let it sit, see how long it takes to separate. Let's move on to the Nutr. Okay, for this one, we're gonna do 2 tablespoons of oat because we're making a small batch. Oh yes, and also for consistency's sake, I am using sink water every time. 1 cup of water. So maybe that much. This one twists on to lock. Let's do start. And yeah, room temp works for me. Right, and then we're just gonna strain it right into the jar. Do a taste test. This one looks really watery. I even followed the recipe from their website, but it looks really watery. I don't know if you can quite tell on camera, but it doesn't look quite as thick as the last one. It tastes quite similar. This might actually be grittier, which would not be the fault of the Nutr itself. It would be the fault of their strainer basket. So perhaps it would just be that it needed to be double strained as well, just like the blender milk, but it is far less slimy than the blender. I think really my only critique is I would probably do another tablespoon of oats. This is not thick enough. It is quite watery. I would not want to make a latte with this because of the wateriness. It's 9:18 on this one. You can already see the blender one separating. Yep, you can see that water layer on top and then the grittier layer on the bottom, and it's only been 13 minutes. We're gonna fill this basket with our ingredients. A cup of oats, hopefully that fits in there. That's a half cup because I have to use at least 5 cups of water. Let's fill this first with 5 cups of water. I'm gonna set it in here just in case the maple syrup leaks. 1, 3. More salt than the other 2. Oh good, no maple syrup leaked. That was easier than the almonds. Working the almonds into that basket was kind of tricky. And this one just has 1 setting / 1 button, so here we go. All right. It's done. That was quick. I wish it made some sort of noise when it was done, like the Nutr does. Oh, the Nutr's already separated back here. It's only been 6 minutes for that one to separate. But the light changes color on top, so it's not very colorblind friendly. It changes from white to blue. When it's white when it's running, blue is when it's not running. Let's let some of that drip out. You can just set it right in here, which makes mess and cleanup very efficient. Let's give her a taste test. It smells just like the other ones. Here's what it looks like visually. That's definitely the clearest. I can barely see any grit in there. Great sign. Interesting. It still tastes gritty, or feels gritty. 0 sliminess. It's almost the grittiest. And what I think is probably happening is it is blending the oats the finest. So the grit is probably much more fine than the Nutr or the blender was able to provide. Therefore, more difficult to strain. That's my theory. But overall, I enjoy it. I think all 3 of these recipes, though, need more oats. They are all very watery. Okay, I'm writing down my criteria now for what we're going to be judging them based off of, and then I'm going to rank them. Let's get to it. All right, the results are in for now. Because one of our criteria is longevity, how long it lasts in the fridge, we have a very clear loser. The other two are close. So I think longevity in the fridge would determine which one of these are better, but there is a very clear loser here. So let's go over my criteria one by one. Starting with versatility, we're just gonna say blender. Easily 10 out of 10. You can do anything with a blender. So I love how versatile that is. The Nutr, you can do quite a bit as well. So I gave that an 8 out of 10. The only reason I marked it down was because of its size. You can't make like a multi-family meal in a Nutr, but you can make a meal for one. You could also make smoothies, juices, whatever in a Nutr as well. And then the Almond Cow, honestly, probably a little bit generous, giving it a 2 out of 10 for versatility because you could only make milks in there, which is fine. That's what it's meant for. But I'm not a fan of single-purpose products, especially for one of that size. It takes up a lot of space in my kitchen for me to only use for one thing. Price. And I did 2 different rankings for a blender here because if you already have a blender, it's free. Therefore, the price is a 10 out of 10. But if you have to buy a blender, this was a hard one to judge too because I'm going based off of Vitamix because that is what I used and that is what I have, and a Vitamix is $500. I gave it a 2 out of 10 for price at full value. The Nutr is the cheapest of the 3 if you buy them all brand new at $189, so I gave it a 7 out of 10. I still think that's quite pricey for making homemade milk at home, but it's the cheapest of the 3. And then the Almond Cow is $2.75. And I originally gave it a 4, but then I'm like, wait a minute, this is a single purpose product. I'm giving it a 2. Because wow, why would I pay nearly $300 for a product that I can only use to make milk? Like that's 2/3 the cost of a blender, and a blender can do anything. Moving on to the actual milk itself. First, we're gauging off of grittiness, and I gave them an 8, a 7, a 6 respectively for the blender, Nutr, and the Almond Cow. So surprising. I thought they would be reversed, but I thought the Almond Cow would be less gritty and a Vitamix or a blender would be more gritty. And I think it just does come down to how finely the Almond Cow blends stuff. To be fair, when I made almond milk the other day in the Almond Cow, it was less gritty, and I think it was because it didn't get those hard almonds as finely ground as the oats. So it probably does depend which sort of milk you're making in the Almond Cow, but we're judging on oat milk today. Sliminess. This is precisely what I thought. Blender was the worst, then the Nutr, and then the Almond Cow, I did 5, 7, 10. And then the mess was also quite similar. Blender was the most messy. You had to double strain, which requires a strainer, 2 bowls, and the blender. Though it does get some credit here because the blender is actually dishwasher washable. Because the Nutr and the Almond Cow are machinery, you can't put them in the dishwasher, making them honestly kind of annoying to clean by hand. And then as you can see my big pile of dishes over there, it takes up a lot of room in the drying rack as well. So Nutr and Almond Cow only got 7 out of 10. Because yes, they were better for like straining out the solids. I think that part of it was less messy, but overall, I have just as much stuff for the blender over there as I do for the Nutr and the Almond Cow, and I had to wash it all by hand. So cleanup, regardless for any of these, is not that fun. Okay, moving on to time, meaning how quickly can you get milk? Blender, I gave it 10 out of 10. That was easily the quickest, especially oat milk. You can control oat milk a lot better, and honestly, it only takes 15 to 20 seconds in a blender, 30 absolute max. I gave the Almond Cow a 9 out of 10 because it was also very, very quick, which is expected for oat milk, but the Almond Cow is just as quick for any other form of nut milk, almonds, soy. No matter how hard the nut or seed you're putting into the Almond Cow, it's still really, really quick. And honestly, that is where Almond Cow wins. And then the Nutr got the worst, a 2 out of 10. Nutr takes forever. Even at its quickest speed, it still takes 5 minutes. Okay, noise. The Almond Cow was definitely the loudest, especially when it is doing something harder like almonds. So I gave it a 1 out of 10 for noise. I gave the Vitamix a 6 out of 10 because it was loud, but not too bad. And the Nutr is definitely the quietest, but it still got a 7 out of 10 because it's still noisy. I'm not saying I expect any of these to be fully silent because I understand we are blending stuff, but this is just something to keep in mind, right? Like if you have children, if you have neighbors who complain about noise, whatever it might be, just some things to keep in mind. Nutr was definitely the quietest. Amount of milk made. This was hard to judge because it depends on you. How much milk do you want? I personally don't want a lot, so I put the Nutr just slightly above the Almond Cow, because the Almond Cow, you have to make a minimum of 5 cups of milk. And if you're not gonna drink that much in 3 to 5 days, it's gonna go to waste. So it really, really does suck, and it is definitely not the machine for you if you're just an individual or a household who doesn't use a lot of milk. But I can see why someone would rank the Almond Cow a 10 out of 10 if they do use 5 to 6 cups of milk regularly, and you will use it all. I put the Almond Cow at a 6, Nutr at a 7. Both of them have their benefits depending on your personal needs. The blender did get a 10 out of 10 because you can control however much milk you need to make in your blender. If you need to make half of a cup or 8 cups, you can make any amount of milk in a blender, no questions asked, because it's not like a programmable machine like the other two. You don't have to set a minimum or maximum amount of water in there. And then convenience. So this convenience score kind of incorporates several things to include, is this something that you already have? Is this something that is versatile? Can you put it in the dishwasher? Does it store really well? And things like that. So I gave them an 8 for the blender, a 6 for the Nutr, and a 4 for the Almond Cow. I just think the Almond Cow is way too bulky. It is single purpose, and it was a lot of stuff that you have to wash by hand because both the top part and the bottom part are both mechanical. So you can't put any single part of the Almond Cow into the dishwasher, which really sucks for convenience. And then of course the blender comes out on top because if it's something that you already have, great, you can put it in the dishwasher. You can make however much milk you want in there. Of course, then we have our longevity that I cannot judge yet. And then our last criteria that we are able to judge right now is size. The Nutr comes out on top for size. If you live in a small apartment or if you live in an RV like we used to, the Nutr really came in handy because the blender just too big for an RV, the Almond Cow way too big, and especially because the Almond Cow is way too big for something that is single purpose. So I gave the Nutr a 9 out of 10 for size. It's still a little bit bulky, but really not too bad. The blender I gave a 6 out of 10. Again, solely based off of size. I probably would mark it down more if not for the fact that it is also multi-use. And that is why the Almond Cow gets a 2 out of 10 because it is so bulky and you could only use it for milk. Therefore, it's not a machine that you're using regularly. My microwave is gigantic, but I don't mind because I use it 2 to 3 times a day. An Almond Cow is bulky and I use it maybe once a week. It's just a really inconvenient thing to have sitting on my shelf collecting dust, a product that I really am not consuming a whole lot of, and it's gigantic. I could be using that space for something else. That brings our scores to our loser, Almond Cow, 48 out of 110 points. Second place is Nutr with 67 out of 110 points, and the blender comes out on top just barely with 70 out of 110 or 78 out of 110, depending on how we judge price. So currently as we're sitting, the blender wins by 3 to 12 points, meaning that if the Nutr milk lasts longer in the fridge, the Nutr could come out on top. So I'm gonna say it's pretty close neck and neck between the blender and the Nutr. If you have to buy something brand new, if you don't have a blender, I would say buy the Nutr because the Nutr is multi-purpose. It is very, very small and it's probably cheaper than a blender. But if you already have a blender, I think that's the clear winner here because you already have it. Therefore, you don't have to spend any money. You don't have to buy a new product. The grittiness was great. The versatility of it was great. The time to make milk was great. The amount that you can control is great. It was one of the least noisy options. It is the most inconvenient to clean up. The sliminess wasn't great, but overall, it ranked top or second place in most of these categories. And then honestly, Nutr, it got pretty much straight 7s across the board. So the Nutr is very comfortably in like the top middle, and Almond Cow pretty consistently in the bottom. It had some really high, it had a couple 9s, but it also had several 2s, a 1, and a 4. So I think that really just proves that the Almond Cow has some really great highs and also some really low lows. But ultimately, as with it comes to a lot of things in the zero waste movement, use what you have. A blender will make a good oat milk. Now, will a blender make a good almond milk or a hemp milk or a soy milk or a cashew milk? I don't know. That was not today's experiment. So if you want me to test other milks in all 3 of these machines, once again, doing them head to head, I'm happy to. Oat milk is very, very common. I feel like it's got a lot of popularity. It is also the most environmentally friendly and the most economical. Oats are so cheap. But now the real test. I'm gonna make a latte because the people on Instagram asked me to see, does homemade oat milk froth? Okay, but first let's look at how separated these are because they have all separated. And also I'm going to be using the Almond Cow milk for my latte because there is the most milk in here. Therefore, I can keep the other 3 in the fridge and see how long they last. Honestly, they're all pretty equally separated right now. This is the Almond Cow, this is the Nutr, and this is the blender. This one's like separated into thirds. You see that? Interesting. And this one's very foamy. There's foam on top too. Okay, here we go. You can definitely see there was some rise right there. So it definitely did froth a little bit. I started at 8 ounces and now I'm at 12. So we definitely got some froth on there. Don't judge my lack of latte art. And I'm gonna be on Instagram at the same time. Okay, taste test. A little watery, but overall good flavor. And yeah, there's definitely some bubbles on top. I mean, not nearly as frothy as store-bought, but yeah, I'm kind of surprised it frothed at all. It just really does not hit the same as store-bought. But I think that really comes down to all 3 of these batches of oat milk were just too watery. All right, so here's Almond Cow separated, Nutr separated. Here's the blender. That's still not separated yet. A little bit at the top. You can see it ever so slightly at the top, but that's keeping together much better. It also looks like it might be the grittiest down there. But yeah, here's how we're sitting right now. I'm gonna put them in the fridge. Okay, we have some updates on the oat milk. I do have an update on the longevity. They all separated really badly in the fridge, all of them. So no one was a real winner there on how much it separates in the fridge. With anything homemade, consume it as fast as possible, which I think is a really big perk to the Nutr because you're only gonna make exactly what you need and there's not gonna be any stored left over. It gets worse every single day. It's been probably 4 or 5 days since I made the oat milk. It's just been sitting in the fridge because we've just been out busy with friends, not really eating at home. We've been eating out. So the Almond Cow oat milk did sit in the fridge all weekend and it settled such a thick layer on the bottom. I had to like spray it out. If you need to make oat milk, say 2, 3, 4 days in advance, I would just suggest you shake it every morning, every evening to hopefully help that settling decrease a little bit. And honestly, I'm sure the Nutr milk would have done the same thing and then blender milk would have done the same thing had I kept them in the fridge that long as well. Now, an update on the sliminess. When I poured out the almond milk, it was only a little bit slimy. I was very impressed that it didn't get much slimier over time, just a little bit. The Nutr milk, when I used it later, was not slimy at all, but the blender milk, when I used it, did get slimier over time. And also, of course, this was an oat milk experience. I'm sure the results would be slightly different had I done almond milk across the 3 machines. The Almond Cow is best suited for hard seeds and nuts. You don't have to soak them at all when using it in an Almond Cow. So that is a really big perk to the Almond Cow. The Nutr as well, I do believe like you would have to soak your soybeans, you would have to soak your almonds to use in the Nutr. These are just all things to keep in mind. Perhaps they would alter my ratings just a little bit. I think if you're gonna buy a machine, it ultimately depends what your budget is and how much milk you want to make. I think the Nutr and the Almond Cow were close enough across the most important categories in making milk. But if you are an individual, maybe you're just a couple, maybe you just are a household that does not consume a lot of milk, the Nutr is probably the way to go for you because it only makes 1 or 2 cups of milk per serving. But if you are a big family that consumes a lot of milk every single day, week, year, the Almond Cow is probably for you because it can make 5 to 6 cups per batch. It's also a very, very quick time turnaround. So that's ultimately what I think would come down to if that is your deciding factor on which machine to buy, except for, of course, the Nutr is cheaper and a little bit more multi-purpose. But honestly, if you're looking for oat milk in particular and you already have a blender, just use a blender. And obviously you can still make almond milk in a blender too. It just takes a little bit more prep, a little bit more straining. I think oat milk is the easiest to make at home and of course the cheapest. If you have a blender, just use it. And that was one of my biggest questions that I got on my initial video about the Almond Cow that I posted on Shorts. Is this machine actually worth it? It depends. If you have the money to spare and you use a lot of milk and you want the best texture, you want the quickest results, absolutely it's worth it. But if you already have a blender and you're just looking to save some money and save some waste, just use your blender. I think the Almond Cow did provide a really nice texture over the blender, but ultimately it wasn't that significant for me to want to spend $300, right? Like if you already have a blender, it's technically free. You can start making oat milk right now. So those are my final thoughts about these 3 ways that you can make oat milk at home. Definitely let me know your thoughts down below. If you want me to do another test, another almond milk, walnut milk, flax milk, hemp milk, soy milk, whatever kind of homemade milk you want me to try next, I can try it in the 3 machines, rate them accordingly again if you would like, or if there are other machines out there, let me know. Of course, I already have 3. I don't think I necessarily need more, and for now, I'm holding on to all of them. But if I ever get rid of any of them, they will be on my Instagram stories. I will probably just do like a first come, first serve basis. Honestly, probably just giving it away. So follow me on Instagram if I were to ever get rid of those machines, but honestly, in the short term, I don't think I'm going to. So I am very glad that these brands sent these to me for me to make content like this, and except for the blender, I did buy the blender myself. It makes it a lot more accessible for me. It makes it a lot more accessible for you guys as well to see which option works best for you. So hopefully you found this valuable. Hopefully you enjoyed my little experiment. And if you're interested in more brand reviews like this, check out this playlist right here and let me know your recommendations down below for other brand reviews. I love to do brand reviews head to head, so that way you guys know which option is the best according to price, quality, how well it works, etc., etc. But that is all that I have for today. Thank you so much for coming along with me. This was a lot of fun. This is the most fun I've had making a video in a while. It's so much more fun to do something, an experiment, than just like sit here and talk to the camera. I love that too, but you get the idea. It's a little more interactive for everybody involved. So thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting me. I'll see you in the next one. But until then, remember that your small actions make a big difference in the long run. Bye guys. This is the face of someone who realized they didn't take any photos. So what am I gonna do about the thumbnail? I'll figure it out later when I'm editing this in a few weeks. This angle's awful, sorry. It's very SpongeBob.